Be here. My name is Lucie Smith. I'm one of the senior managers with WBCSD's Agriculture and Food Pathway team. WBCSD is a bit of a barbaric acronym. It means World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and it's a CEO-led community of businesses that drive the corporate sustainability agenda. I myself specifically look after a platform which is called the Soft Commodities Forum, and which is made up of 6 agricultural commodity trading firms that have come together in order to address the risk of deforestation and native vegetation conversion from their Brazilian soy supply chains. A very warm welcome to all of you and to this panel discussion that is going to allow us to dive into the need to deeply transform our agricultural value chains. And I think I can speak on behalf of all 3 of the speakers today that we're really delighted to be here and excited to be sharing some stories, some insights, and some very concrete examples of how the 3 organizations that are present here, so the Nature Conservancy, the Intertribal Agriculture Council, as well as Nestlé Purina, as to how they navigate the complexities of transforming the food system. So I'm going to give them each an opportunity to introduce themselves and also share why they're particularly excited to speak to you as students and as future leaders in the sustainability space. Maybe let's start with you, Nicholas.
Thank you. Yate Yabini, everybody. She'e Nicholas Rajen, Kiani Nishli, India Bashachin, Ado Oneida Iroquois, Turtle Clan, Dashache, Ado India Dashanelis. I'm an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, and I also work at the Intertribal Agricultural Council as a natural resources specialist. And our organization was started in 1987. We're 1989, but we're a nonprofit organization that serves all 574 federally recognized tribes, as well as state recognized tribes where we can in the United States. And we're a pretty big and growing organization at the same time. But my work in natural resources is really about soil health. It's all about sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and just these systems in which, like, native foodways, native seedways, native seed trading, and then also just that native ecology and habitat are really the basis for a sustainable, nutritious, and incredibly regenerative in these times systems for agriculture, and that's food, fiber, medicine, and also fuels when you think about it as well. Yeah, very, very happy to be here. Thank you all so much.
Hi, I'm Lisa Kushner from the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is the world's largest conservation organization. We started out as a land trust, buying and protecting very important pieces of land. And then we expanded over decades to look at how do we need to work across policy, across businesses, across the communities, so that we are treating all lands and waters in ways that can provide for both people and nature. So that led us into our work in agriculture. Agriculture has the greatest impact on water. In most places, it has the greatest impact on land. And so we have to work with agriculture to create the future that can both provide for people, but can also provide for nature. So I work on our North America agriculture team. I'm the project director for a newer project called the Upper Mississippi Foodscape, which is an area of about 25 million acres between Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois, and we are looking at how do we scale regenerative agriculture at a landscape scale level. So there's a big focus on markets, public policies, and also sort of farmer and consumer behavior. And I'm really excited to talk to students because I think it's really important to think about these issues sort of at the beginning or in the middle of your career, and how do you really embed them in everything that we do. So whether you end up, at a company or working in sustainability in another way, it's a really important skill set to have. So super excited that you're interested in this area.
Thank you. And hello, my name is Jack Scott, and I'm very happy to be here today. I'm going to start off by telling you how excited I am to be here because I am actually a graduate from the University of Michigan Business School. Graduated in 2003 with my MBA. Went to work for Nestle. I work for Nestle. I work at Purina. Been there almost 21 years and started in brand marketing and brand management. So it's always exciting for me to be able to come back to the university. My kids actually go to school here now. That's how old I am. And I get an opportunity to interact with students, have opportunities to speak about the work that I do and so forth. So a little bit about me. When I went to work for Nestle Purina Pet Care, I was actually in marketing, did that for about 5 years, and then took an international assignment over in China with the family and lived there for 3 years. During that time, got firsthand exposure to a melamine crisis in our milk supply, and then later palm oil, and actually visited our palm oil plantations. Came back to the United States and then started having other challenges as related to poultry and feed, and actually started managing the team over in China and rebuilt those supply chains. This is all before sustainability was even a buzzword, so to say. Around 2013, 2014, we had allegations of forced labor in Thai seafood, and they said, hey, Jack, since you're already going to Asia, why don't you go ahead and go down to Thailand and manage that team and rebuild those supply chains. Come back to the United States. I've been working in dairy, working row crops, rice, meat, poultry, eggs, and I still manage seafood. My team, I should say, manages seafood globally for Nestle. And I do a lot of work with regenerative agriculture. I spend a lot of time working with farmers and with ranchers, implementing practices and projects on the ground. So happy to take any questions and really looking forward to chatting with all of you today. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And just in terms of time management, I think we're going to try and allocate at least 10, 15 minutes to Q&A, so don't hesitate to jot down any questions for our speakers, and we'll get to them at the end of the session. Maybe as a really quick introduction, what's becoming increasingly clear is that when looking at food systems transformation, is that it's going to prove increasingly challenging to feed a growing world population while staying in line with a 1.5-degree trajectory of warming and while staying in line with planetary boundaries. And so the equation that we're looking at is how do we, first of all, reduce the environmental footprint of our food system, because it's, as Lisa referred to, a massive generator of greenhouse gas emissions. About a fourth of global greenhouse gas emissions come from our food systems. It's a driver of nature loss. It's a driver of freshwater depletion, among other impacts that are primarily driven through agricultural expansion. So how do we reduce the environmental impact of our food system while producing food that's healthy and that's nutritious, and while generating equitable livelihoods, because we know that a very large and disproportionate number of farmers and food producers are currently living under the poverty line. And so that's the sort of equation that we're dealing with. And the good news is that there are solutions, right? There are solutions that don't necessarily need to be quick fixes, that would further worsen the climate crisis and further erode biodiversity, soils, and ecosystem health. One of the solutions that is being bounced around a lot, and we've heard it already, is the term regenerative agriculture. So Lisa, I want to turn to you, and I think it would be really useful to hear how the Nature Conservancy as an organization defines regenerative agriculture and the hopes that it puts into the concept in terms of the different outcomes that it can deliver.
Thanks. Yeah. So regenerative agriculture is one of those terms that doesn't have an exact definition, but there's sort of general consensus on the principles of regenerative agriculture. And so some of those principles are, first you have to understand the context of the system. So here in Michigan, we're not going to grow citrus and kiwis and crops that don't belong here. So you need to think about what can be grown in a place. The second principle is cover the soil. So that can be done in a variety of ways. That can be done with cover crops or perennials. or a very diversified cropping system that always has something in the land. And you're doing that because you want to reduce erosion, you want to keep water in the system, and you want to keep the sort of living nature of the soil. The next principle is minimize soil disturbance. So that can be done in a variety of ways. There's physical soil disturbance with tillage. There's chemical disturbance when you're spraying a pesticide on a field that is going to kill off what's existing. There's also grazing disturbance, and so you want to really be mindful about when and how you're using disturbance. The next principle is increased diversity. Here in the Midwest, there's a monoculture of mostly corn and soy that creates a lot of issues with pests, but also biodiversity. So having 3, 4 multiple crops being grown in rotation helps with that principle. The fifth principle is maintain continuous living plants and roots, and you're doing that to keep erosion down, to keep water cycling through the system, to keep the carbon cycle going, and also to allow sort of natural soil processes to happen. And then the last one is integrating livestock. And so that's keeping the waste cycle, the sort of waste nutrient cycle going, and also helping to increase root matter, which has a whole lot of positive things. So those are the general principles that can happen in a variety of ways. So the different practices that we really want to see increasing are sort of basic soil health practices like no-till or conservation tillage, planting of cover crops, crop diversification in systems. This can be both for sort of additional cash crops or ones that you're just planting to get some of those positive benefits that are going to support your other marketable crops. Agroforestry, so that's the incorporation of trees into a cropping system. That can be done in a variety of ways, but those trees provide a lot of carbon, water, biodiversity benefits. And then the last system is integrated livestock management. So if we can scale the adoption of those systems, you can see a variety of benefits. Carbon benefits, both with increased sequestration in the soil, but also reduced emissions because you need less chemical fertilizers, you need fewer passes with a tractor. We see lots of water benefits, both in water quality and quantity, but also in storage capacity. So you're reducing flood risks, you're improving drought resilience, and then improvements in biodiversity. We know that sort of the more species that are on the land, whether that's row crops or others, increases biodiversity, both in the water and on the land. And then you also have a lot of community resilience benefits and farmer resilience benefits. So all of those practices, I think, can lead to a system that can support farmers, can support all of us that need to eat, but that can also improve environmental outcomes.
Thanks. So we basically have, with regenerative agriculture, a very holistic approach to sustainable farming that's anchored in a few key principles and practices that you've just outlined. Clearly, those methods need to be adopted by farmers who are the first stewards of their land and who oversee how they manage their own land. What's difficult in promoting the adoption of those practices in your experience at TNC?
Yeah, I think farmers need to have markets in which to sell into. So right now there aren't a lot of larger scale markets for diversified products. When you look at sort of land use in the Midwest, about 90% of the row crop lands are grown with 2 crops, and so there are, lots of opportunities to grow corn and soybeans, but fewer opportunities to grow other crops. And the whole supply chain has really specialized around that. And so you need to have big infrastructure changes in order to build those markets. There are also a lot of public policies that reduce risk and support the demand for those crops. And those risk reduction products like crop insurance and other public policy incentives don't exist in the same measure or at all for other crops. So we really need to look at how do you build the same infrastructure around other crops. And the other practices around tillage and cover crops are not sort of systematically rewarded by the current supply chain. So there are companies that provide incentives or favorable contracts or risk mitigation for farmers to make those transitions, and that's really needed and great, but those are not widespread. So how do we really build that into sort of the business as usual expectation of supply chains? And then there's also a whole ecosystem of farmer advisors. So those could be agricultural retailers, lenders, extension agents, other farmers that a farmer relies on for advice, for technical support, for financial either support or just general operating loans. And all of that is really optimized around the current system. So we need to be working on how do you sort of build the knowledge and skills of that whole advising community to better support regenerative agriculture.
Thanks. So Jack, let's move to you. So we've talked about supply chain transformation, incentivizing farmers, reducing financial risks. How do these solutions translate to Nestle Purina's business? And how does your company really try and strike a balance between nature preservation, again, equitable livelihoods, and then producing nutritious and healthy foods?
Thank you. Great question. Let me start off by saying that it can be done. It can very much be done. And actually, some of the farms that we have in our system are highly regenerative to the point where they're actually net sequesterers. And those are systems that very much like was just described, are using crop diversity. They're planting green. They have incredibly high SCI scores, soil conditioning index scores, which is a measure by NRCS. And so there is a pathway towards this. For a company like us, right, we've produced a commitment to basically have 50% of our ingredients to be regenerative sourced by the end of this decade. And it's in line with our climate commitment to also reduce our climate footprint by 50% versus a 2018 baseline, which is SBTI. I think one of the challenges is, to kind of flip the coin, is whether or not there is a downstream market, a consumer marketplace that is actually looking for this. And what we're finding through a lot of our research is there's not a big market for this. When most people are, for example, wanting to buy a frozen pizza, right, or a frozen meal, or even a pet food, they're still making their decision based on what pack size, how many people am I going to feed, can I get more toppings, please, right? Those are the things that are interesting to that downstream market. But there is this brand affinity that's being associated with the brand like Purina that is making a lot of progress in this particular area, as well as with Nestle, not just among consumers, but among investors, because we are finding ways to create a more long-term sustainable and healthy food supply chain through what we're doing. To add a little bit more onto that, just moving back a little bit towards the farmer, I'm always looking upstream at the farmer and trying to figure out how to actually incentivize farmers to voluntarily, and those are two key words you need to make sure is part of your vocabulary, incentivization and voluntary. that they will go ahead and be willing to adapt these sort of practices into their farming system in order to be able to protect nature as well. And this is really, really key because you can target a couple of key practices that will have the biggest impact towards a climate reduction, let's say, or sequestration. And so in row crops among corn and soy, everyone's targeting cover crops and no-till right now. Those deliver the highest impacts towards anyone's climate commitment. And if you're talking rice, it's AWD, alternating wetting and drying, which can actually have upwards of about a ton per acre impact, which is phenomenal. That is huge. The challenge is that's not enough to create a regenerative system. And if we're really talking about creating a large landscape ecosystem solution, A, more companies have to be involved. B, we have to incentivize a far larger number of practices. And C, we have to find more farmers in those communities that are wanting to participate. It is very easy for me to be able to find that 1 out of every 100 farmers that want to do it, but finding the other 99 is very challenging. So there is pathways both upstream and downstream to deliver that sort of value to our corporate brands per se, maybe not our individual consumer brands. At the same time, find ways to deliver value all the way upstream back into nature and ecosystems.
Thanks. You said something that struck me and that you kind of alluded to, which is maybe Nestle can't do this on its own, and it needs to work collaboratively with some of its competitors in order to be able to address those common industry challenges and work them out, maybe as a sector. Could you speak to that? Is that something that Nestle does?
It's absolutely something that we do. And so how many of you go out to the SBTI website and actually take a look at companies that make commitments? Good. You should do that. Everyone should go to the SBTI website, scroll down, find out where companies, over 7,400 companies have made SBTI commitments. But you got to read the commitments to understand who's actually committing to what. I can assure you when it comes to CPG companies, there is no company that has made a stronger commitment than Nestle. And it's actually quite challenging when I hear other large CPG companies talk about their amazing commitment, and they're only looking to reduce their footprint by 20% by 2030. And we're looking to reduce 50%. We're investing $1.2 billion between now and 2025 just to get to that 20% reduction mark. And I don't know how many more billions we're going to have to spend to get to that 2050. But you have to also understand, to kind of get to your question, how we actually look at that supply. So I'm going to go to rice real quick, because we actually are looking at working with PepsiCo in this particular area. We're taking all of the brokens, right? So when rice is actually cultivated and produced and it's shipped to a mill where it is then polished and packaged, what you're seeing at the store, those pretty nice white pieces, that's only about 55% of that was actually produced on the land. There's another 45% that is either going into some sort of production, if you will. And what we're doing as a pet food company is taking all of the broken pieces, all those pieces that nobody wants but has the exact same nutritional value as those nice, really polished pieces. We're taking all of that, and that's about 10 to 15% of the crop. PepsiCo, with their Uncle Ben's, or no, is it Rice-A-Roni? Rice-A-Roni, they want the other 55%. Today, I have to invest the entire field, even though I'm only taking 10 to 15% of it. So I am paying a tremendous amount of money to basically create a regenerative system on each of those farm acres. With PepsiCo coming in, we're now going to be able to split that 50-50, right? And if we can get a few more in, like we're really working on Walmart right now, because they're right there located in Arkansas, then they can go ahead and take maybe another 20 or 30%. And there are consortiums that allow for that sort of collaboration. My favorite in particular is Field to Market. Great organization. Carter used to work there. I'm actually chairman of the board, so I have to probably disclose that as well. But it's an opportunity for basically supply chain partners to come together, collaborate, and talk about how we can actually create these systems where everyone is investing equally in those acres, each taking their portion, and then thinking about how to bring it through the supply stream all the way back to the consumer.
Thanks. Nicholas, we'll move to you in just a second because there's just one last question that I have for you. So you were talking about structuring out the commercial conditions between the different stakeholders in the supply chain and the importance of partnerships in order to do so. Have you started looking into in-value chain mitigation programs where the claims that would be attributable to all of the supply chain points that are co-investing in driving that change could be co-claimed between, say, a producer, Nestle, Walmart? How are you thinking out those issues?
That is another great question about how do we actually then not just co-invest in trying to create that regenerative system, but then what are we able to say and claim? And that can be a bit tricky. For those, I would say, eagle-eye watchdogs, right? You know, they're wanting to make sure that we're only claiming as portion as much as that we've invested in. And, you know, there's going to be others that are going to be saying, well, Pepsi can only say this much and Nestle can only say that much. And I'm saying Pepsi, by the way, in total confidence here, trying to be ultra transparent. That deal is not finalized, but we're damn close. What I'll tell you is that when you're thinking about how do you structure those claims, you really have to follow the guidances that are created through either SBTI or the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. These are basically the rule books, and everyone has to abide by these rule books in order to create that level playing field. If people are not abiding by that, and there are some who are taking advantage of the system right now and the amount of dollars that are flowing in, it can be a very murky place, I would say. For those companies that do have, I would say, greater scrutiny placed upon them, we're certainly putting a lot more effort into ensuring that, for example, if we split that acre 50-50, then they will claim 50% and we will claim 50% of the climate benefits. What that allows us to do is actually go from 60,000 acres to 120,000 acres, because I'm still going to invest the same amount of money, and if they invest the same amount of money, I still need to be able to claim the same amount of carbon. So I'm just going to go ahead and up the number of acres, and so are they. And this is what basically begins that sort of, I would say, scaling up process. And if we can get Walmart in or another retailer or another food company, then we can scale up those acres even more. And that's really the end goal in all of this.
Great. Thank you. So, Nick, let's move to you. I think as maybe an introduction to your organization's role in this space, it would be useful to maybe present who the Intertribal Agricultural Council are and how you're contributing to this holistic approach that's been discussed with
Yeah, no, definitely. So IAC, as I mentioned, it was formed 1987-89, and that was in response to the agricultural crisis that was ongoing, like throughout the country and no doubt the globe. So farmers everywhere were struggling at that time, but the native producers, native ranchers, farmers, when they would go to the USDA and they'd try to get assistance, nobody would meet with them, or they'd be waiting in a lobby for like 4 hours. There was just nothing that was there to really help them out. So these tribes and producers, they all formed together to create Intertribal Agriculture Council so that they would have that kind of like support with each other and support to lobby either like with the government, USDA, actually get those provisions made, get that kind of support and assistance that they need critically as well. So that was the beginning of it. Where IAC is now is we've grown quite a bit, like just in the last few years, let alone the last 33. But we're comprised of a C-suite. We also have a law and policy branch. We have a youth programs branch, because you look out at the agricultural landscape now, and farmers are just getting older and older and older, and like there's not a lot of youth who are coming in to work on these systems for food, for these agricultural products. So we have youth and development, and the program that I'm coming out of is actually natural resources. So in natural resources, we're looking at soil, water, air, animals, energy. And one really big one that I'm talking about and bringing up more often is fire. Fire is a natural resource as well. You have to look at fire more like water rather than this like destructive force. So natural resources is very important, because all these resources that we're looking at interconnect with each other, but the biodiversity, the qualities of our soil, what's going into our groundwater, like excessive nitrates from fertilizers are just destructive period, they lead to all kinds of just terrible health outcomes for a population, let alone other industrial wastes and like PFAS and everything else that might be leaching out from industry to like even agricultural practices. So that's where I'm coming from. But outside of natural resources, we also have very regional work that we do. We have the Technical Assistance Network, which is comprised of technical assistants and technical assistant managers who oversee unique regions throughout the United States. So we have regions for the Northwest, we have Alaska, California, Nevada, Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, and East region, Southeast region, Midwest, Great Plains. So this really allows us to work individually with farmers and producers and also give that assistance with tribes when they need it as well. So IAC, we're working with tribes, so sovereign governments. We're also working with producers, and these producers might be ranchers who are managing 5,000, 15,000 acres, or they could be like a tribal school that's opening up a community garden, so something that's very small, like 100 square feet or something like that as well. So there's a great diversity of people that we're working with and that we're supporting. And these tribes, they extend beyond like these United States borders, you know, like you consider the Mohawk in New York, they have their reservation in Canada and New York, in United States, or like the Kumeyaay or the Yaqui, they're right between the United States and Mexico as well. So there's a lot of this international component that needs to be considered as well when we're working with these tribal producers. And really what we're looking at is to bring back that balance and harmony when we're trying to do our farming, because it's a really beautiful thing that we do. And not all tribes were ancestrally farmers. So I'm Navajo, I'm Dene. We raise corn, squash, and beans, very much similar to the people from here, Anishinaabe. They'd be raising their own agricultural crops, but they'd also have access to all these incredible foods and resources that are coming from the rivers and lakes that they're surrounded by as well. But there's tribes like in California, like the Ohlone tribes or people who are living on the coast. They didn't need to use this kind of agricultural process of planting seeds and like having row crops. And our row crops are more polycultured, like you're planting corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, chilies all together so that you have a full nutritional profile for one, but you're also supporting much more biodiversity. You're supporting all sorts of species of birds and insects and pollinators with that kind of system. But for these other tribes who don't need to do this, they trade with us, but they're managing the forest in that form of agroforestry. So they're going out, they're reseeding forests, they're reseeding landscapes, they're pruning, they're also taking care of the wildlife, bison, deer, elk, ducks, all sorts of other animals. And again, like that fire, they're routinely firing and burning grasslands and forest ecosystems, depending on like where they're at. So if you're in a much more like humid or you're getting a little bit more rain, maybe you're burning every 5 to 15 years, or if you're in an arid environment, maybe you're burning every 8 to 25 years or something like that. Like it really depends on where you're at, but that's a form of agriculture that's just now picking up steam in the greater consciousness. And it's like, this is an ancient system that people have been working with for thousands of years. Agroforestry is just very important. So that's one of the importance of having this regional outlook. And there's so much more that I like to share, but
no, this is great. This is great. Thanks so much. I want to turn to Jack and Lisa here as to what resonates with you as to Nick's points with respect to tribal communities really having agricultural practices and methods that are, well, much older than the arrival of colonialists. And what resonates and how do you incorporate them as key stakeholder groups that can support your agenda?
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that like the principles of regenerative agriculture are really indigenous principles. And many of these indigenous communities were practicing these for, thousands of years. And so they're not new. We are kind of going back to different ways of knowledge. I think it's also important to acknowledge the the land in which we sit and farm, and who are the traditional stewards of that land, and to engage those tribal communities in a very respectful way, like understanding how they want to be engaged. In the Upper Mississippi Foodscape, the project that I lead, the Ho-Chunk people, the Anishinaabe, and Dakota people are the sort of traditional stewards of the land. And so while they may not be very large landholders now, we need to be very respectful of how can we work with their sort of indigenous food sovereignty groups. What needs do they have, and how might we support them in that? So a lot of that is around market access. The Nature Conservancy has a long history of working with bison, and so supporting tribes as they work to reintroduce bison, helping them with technical assistance, but also repatriating bison to them. And that is both a food source, but it's also like a cultural value for these tribes. And then I think it's really important to think about the sort of community and farmer resilience piece of this, of how do we support system development that puts more control and more resilience in the hands of the farmers, some of who are indigenous farmers.
2 points real quick. So the first one, very much like yourselves, right? When you think about the core principles of regenerative farming, it really does root back to working with nature, very much as Nick had said. And on the bison point, right, of all of the regenerative farms that I have seen, of all of the systems that I have seen, those that incorporate livestock do an amazing job. Those are the ones that have the best soil, I swear to you. And just watching them move the livestock from paddock to paddock, field to field over the course of, not the cropping season, obviously, but during the cover crops, you will see just amazing things that happen with the soil, as the cows release and the manures on the ground. But I think there's another really key point to this, and that is also thinking about agriculture and DE&I. And this is something that I think most people don't necessarily think about or consider. And one of the things that we're focused on is trying to find ways in which we can also serve underserved minorities that are in farming as well. And so when I think about like black farmers, right? I have a good friend that actually is down in Arkansas. He owns Arkansas River Rice. When he goes out to get a loan from the bank, because every farm has to get a loan the year before in order to be able to pay for all of the stuff, he does not get the same rate always. And he does not have the ability to get the collateral either from other family members or friends who are also farmers to be able to put up the money to get that good rate in order to be able to afford the practices. And therefore, when he's turning around to try to sell his goods at the end of the cropping and harvest period, he can't do it at that same price either. Otherwise, he can't make that much money. And so there is a need to also find ways to support indigenous communities, underserved communities, black farmers, and so forth. So those 2 points.
Maybe so back to you, Nicholas. We were just hearing about the importance of policy frameworks and subsidy schemes being aligned with the necessary transition that we were talking about. Have you seen any encouraging evolutions in that respect in order to make sure that the communities that you're defending and representing are benefiting from the right support from, corporates, civil society players, but also from government?
Yeah, I know that my colleagues can speak much more towards this, but like regarding the farm bill, the upcoming farm bill, we do a lot of work just like working with tribes and also bringing in those provisions that can help out tribal farmers and producers. And this brings it to this history because I think about the work that I do now, and it's like there's all this opportunity, and I have a much easier time working. Like there's still lots of challenges that I'm facing. And then I think about like my daughter and like the descendants after me, like just hope that they have an easier time because my aunt, she's an ethnobotanist and she had to go through so much like racism and had to go through so many more obstacles than I did myself. And then you take this back in history, and these food systems, all these lands were managed in such a way that there was great, great abundance, not only for the human communities, but for the animal communities. And you just get this wave of like genocide and this wave of just removal of people from the land, from Spanish, from United States of America, Europeans. And there's just that culture where it's like, it's much better today than it was then, because there was a systematic push in order to destroy these food systems. Like the bison, 30, 50 million bison roaming not even 200 years ago when you really think about it. And all of that reduced down to like several hundred, if not like maybe 1,000. I think about like the old growth forest. There's old growth forests, old growth grass ecosystems. And this is a point that Fawn made incredibly yesterday too, is that the worth of an old growth tree is way more than any of the houses, any of the like drawers or like shelving, anything that you can think of out of that timber resource. And now in the United States, I think we only have 6%, if not 4%, and it's still dwindling of our old growth resources. So that work, there's a positive trend, it's moving forward, but to rehabilitate some of these ecosystems, it's going to take hundreds of years, it's going to take generations. And I'm thinking about the redwoods right now. Like a redwood old growth could be 2,000 years old, and then you have to think about the generations that redwood is also feeding into, going back and going forward. And this is a tens of thousands of years old process that has had like some interruption now, but there is a good chance for regeneration. So that was just one of the points that I wanted to make on that. But it's definitely getting better now, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
I think it's a really powerful point. We have an incredibly destructive and inequitable food system, agricultural and food system. And there's a lot of work to get done. And we need all the talent that we can get. And I have, from the description of the event, the impression that there's a lot of talent in this room. So I want to give each speaker an opportunity in, say, 1-2 minutes, because we want to keep some time for Q&A. What do you want to tell this audience? How do you want to empower them to act? How do you see, or where do you see the most need in terms of talent acquisition and resources that these young professionals can potentially offer? Jack, let's start with you.
Oh, yeah.
So, is this working? Oh, yeah, okay. So for one thing, right, working in a big company like Nestle, we've got big company challenges when it comes to just navigating the culture and people all over the globe and so forth. Here's what I'm seeing that's happening, right? This idea of having a separate sustainability team is probably not going to be around past 2030. That's my personal opinion. Maybe there'll still be experts within that. What I'm seeing is that it is being integrated into every function within the company. And so if you're wanting to, let's say, think about being part of responsible sourcing or sustainable sourcing, think about, also learning about supply chains and procurement, because those are as a matter of fact, our head of global procurement is now asking every buyer to spend 75% of their time on sustainable sourcing. Every single buyer. So we don't have just one Jack Scott running around doing 100,000 acres of regenerative acre farming, right? We now have 50 buyers that are out there trying to do this as well. And that's the direction that it's going. So as you think about your career, if you want to get into marketing, right? Think about, what does sustainability mean to marketing? If you want to get into manufacturing or the technical side, if you want to get into transportation, that's how you have to kind of think about, I think, your careers going forward, right? Learning something that is going to be beneficial to that organization, and then how do you incorporate sustainability into that?
I would totally echo what Jack just said. I think two of the biggest skills that are needed are, one, collaboration, both within companies but across companies. Jack mentioned like PepsiCo and Nestle working together. That's really needed. Also thinking about how that continues down the supply chain, and with unlikely partners like NGOs, civil society groups. this has to just become kind of part of business as usual for it to succeed. And then the second skill, I think, is how do we bridge the sort of long-term thinking and vision that's needed for these solutions to play out and for these outcomes to show themselves with the sort of short-term nature of, investor demands and kind of the day-to-day. And so how do we develop like the patience, but also the sort of intermediate results or markers so that we can show the value of this work?
Yeah, I'll start off by saying that just the indigenous knowledge and agri-science alone, like there's so many other topics like mathematics, it's incredible, but the global food society right now, the global food production is based on, if not 60, then 70% of American Indian foods: potatoes, corn, chocolate, vanilla, chilies. So many products that come out of indigenous ingenuity. It's not like we found these plants. So I just wanted to mention that like the food system of the globe right now depends on these indigenous knowledge systems and indigenous crops. Beyond that too, like when we talk about soil health and about like where our own sustenance, our own energy comes from, the whole soil is comprised of just billions upon billions of different organisms, from bacteria, amoeba, viruses, all the way up to fungi and all these little insects that are burrowing in their pollinators. And it's not just in the soil, it's in our bodies too. Like we're 49% human by DNA. There's all these like fungi, archaea, like other organisms that are living in our guts, on our eyelids, blood-brain system, skeletons. So all of this kind of collaboration is really, really incredible. And like just the science that's coming out shows that these relationships are very important at all these different scales. So as we scale up from like these tiny microscopic creatures to where we're at, I just want to say that we need to empower our indigenous communities. So anybody that is indigenous, it's just very important to like continue on your path and continue to bring that like resilience and that knowledge and like bring that balance that we know that we're striving for our descendants and also in honor of our ancestors. But it also takes people who are not indigenous as well to really contribute towards all this, because that value and that understanding needs to progress to another level. Part of what I was thinking about, and I'll try to keep this short, is that one of the reasons why our food systems were targeted and destroyed was because so many settlers and colonizers and non-native people were actually becoming native. Like whether they were captured or if they were living amongst native people, they would actually adopt the practices, and it was a much better way of life. So there was a very big need, a very real need, beyond just like needing to gain land. There was a need to destroy these food systems. So really bringing them back, because when you think about here, what Anishinaabe people were doing, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Ojibwa people are doing, is that you're working together with the land, and rather than all these monocrop systems of soy, of corn, they're genetically modified so that they can kill off things like amaranth, they can kill off other plants that are actually very medicinal and nutritious. You have to really consider what it is that you're doing, because the yields of this polyculture crop may exceed what's actually coming out from these monocultures, and it's really just based on really bad science, and it's based on really, really bad systems that will have to be reconciled with, because we make this transition now, and we're all better off for it. But as climate shifts happen, as more extreme weather events happen, you're going to be forced to take on these kind of like systems and these much more indigenous roles. So I'll keep it there, because I'd love to give a long lecture, but I also want to hear the questions from everybody else. So.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Can I have just 30 more seconds?
Yes.
30 more seconds. All right. So here's a huge gap that I'm beginning to notice also. We just hired our first sustainable finance guy. You're all in business school. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking money, right? If you're not studying finance and economics, you should certainly consider it, because the amount of money that's moving into this space right now is all looked at as a cost. And it has to be turned into somehow thinking about it as creating value. And companies are desperate for that. And so thinking about how to actually turn this into something of value, you should definitely be considering also thinking about finance and macroeconomics.
Great.
Sorry.
So I haven't done much talking during this panel, and I'm just going to say that in my role, so working with commodity traders on a pre-competitive basis, I would say that one key mindset that is going to prove increasingly important, I think, in the next few years to come is building on the importance of partnerships has to do with adopting a collaborative mindset. And collaboration is one of those ideas that's kind of undervalued. But in order to really drive the tectonic shifts that need to happen for radical and systemic transformation, we need more collaboration and setting up the right governance structures for that transformation to happen. So that was just my 2 cents as the moderator. We'll move to questions because we have 7 minutes.
All right, as the voice of the people from the app, and feel free to keep submitting and upvoting. Keeping us on the systemic theme for a moment, Lucie. The question is, there's growing interest in things like biomaterials, biofuels, and other non-food uses of crops. So at that 20,000-foot view, how do we think about the best and most sustainable use of our land? And what role does the private sector have in making those decisions?
Lisa.
Yeah, so in the area that I work in, it's primarily a corn and soy-based system. You have 40% of that crop going to biofuels right now. You have 40% of that being used for animal feed, about 10% being going to export, and about 10% for human food. So biofuels are a key piece of the agricultural system and likely to get much, much bigger. There's a lot of work around and a lot of movement right now around biofuels, especially sustainable aviation fuel. If you look at what the Biden administration has set for goals about the amount of sustainable aviation fuel, so right now about 15 million gallons are produced each year. They want to get it up to 50 million gallons by 2030. To do that, you need, like with business as usual, we need to expand the land production by 5 times. We don't have that amount of land, and then you lead to things like land conversion, which has much, much bigger climate impacts as well as water, biodiversity, all that. So how we think about biofuels is a key piece of agriculture. There's a lot of work being done on other crops that can be used as like cover crops and crop diversification that can do that. But those are far off. Like we need to figure out kind of a bridge transition. So I think there's a role for governance with companies, but also like state and federal governments thinking about like what are the guardrails of that biofuel transition, and that's going to be like key to figure out in the next 1 to 2 years before this sustainable aviation fuel really takes off.
I just want to basically echo exactly what Lisa is saying. So you probably heard about USDA under $3 billion in grants. NRCS was another $18 billion. The guy that manages it, his name is Eric in Washington, D.C. Him and I had a chance to talk about it. And I said, what is the market you're actually trying to drive with this? And without missing a beat, he said biofuels. Food is seen as an added value to that. But biofuels market is really what those dollars are intended to be used for.
I'll say really quick too, like the milpa, like the corn, green, squash, it extends much past that. So Maya people actually include like their trees and their other sources that you might build like tools or your structures out of. So that mindset needs to really just start to become bigger. It's like you can have the polyculture where you're not only getting food, but you're getting the biofuels, you're getting textiles, and then when it comes to animals, like when you have that regenerative agriculture, you're moving the animals. Like sure, they're meat or they're like animal food too, but their skins are used for leather, and then you also consider things like mushroom leathers and other products like that. And I also wanted to say really quickly that there's no laboratory that can create anything as intricate and as incredible as like fungal structures, fungi hyphae, and this just brings us all the way back to the soil. Like the way that you're treating and that you manage the soil is just this incredible nature technology that we need to work with rather than destroy. Like, why are you pouring all these fungicides, all these herbicides, all these pesticides to kill off things that are actually very beneficial for everything that's coming out of the soil, out of that soil-water interface as well. So it brings us right back down to the soil.
Okay, another question. Jack, you spoke a bit about some of the commitments coming out of this space at the corporate level. This references a recent report that showed that out of 79 large food companies that have made commitments towards regen ag, only 8% have committed to actually supporting farmers through tangible initiatives. So how do you all react to that or think about picking up the pace and scale of these commitments in action?
It's frustrating because I live it, I see it. There are, I feel like, a handful of companies that are truly putting their money where their mouth is and making that sort of investment directly with the farmers. And it's funny because a lot of us are very highly connected, and so we actually communicate with one another because we're all trying to figure out how to create those collaborative networks. What I will say is it's moving you have to be patient. Someone said that earlier, right? You have to be patient in this because it's moving very quickly. 5 years ago, I had trouble even getting the company to invest dollars into doing work on the ground. We actually had 3 projects with the Nature Conservancy at the time. And today, to see where we are, it's incredible how much is moving in that direction. And it feels like almost every month I hear about another company leaning in heavily. And so I think it's going to come. I think it will come. It's a slow start, but it's certainly more companies are starting to lean in. And I expect that number to rise over the next 5 years dramatically.
So a lot of the work that Lucie does is with the traders, and most companies don't directly source from farmers. Like PepsiCo is unique in that a big amount of their buy is direct sourcing, but most CPG companies have no idea who they're really buying from for farmers. And so I think that requires that the traders are really engaged because a lot of those do have a direct line of sight into who the farmers are. And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done between kind of building the assistance and the incentives between traders and CPG companies so that that does flow down to the farmer.
You cannot transform the food system without the farmer, and agri-traders are the key to farmer access, so absolutely, completely second that. And on the food versus fuel debate, really quickly, I think in terms of collaboration, there's a really big gap in terms of the extent to which the food industry and the energy sector are collaborating or not collaborating, because we're looking at that as one of the main trade-offs of sustainable land use.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I'd say like one of the fastest things would be like just giving land back to like native peoples, whether that's national parks or like all sorts of different things. That would trigger off that biodiversity protection regeneration like immediately, but going to have to be patient on that most likely with this country. But there's a lot that can also be said about just like other markets that can be kind of expanded and opened up, and everybody has like access to soil as well. Like you have your yards or you have like a pot, even if you're not living at a home, you can actually start working with like having seeds growing or like just being a little bit kinder to the environment that's around you. So it can expand out into these like kind of revolutionary other markets as well. But yeah, you consider all these lawns, like millions and millions of square acres of lawns that could definitely be supporting native habitat, native ecosystems, like within 2 growing seasons, like all of you can start that. And it really just comes down to education on these principles as well. And I think that kind of conversion comes when you actually taste some of these things as well, because like what you get out of a grocery store is nothing like what you grow yourself or like from that regenerative farm that's nearby too. So it takes that mindset shift, and yeah, so those are just some quick thoughts there.
I like that. I like the fact that it all starts with the individual, and I was scanning the room to see if anyone had a plastic bottle, and I don't see a single plastic bottle. Isn't that incredible? That is not the case in New York. Not the case. Do we have time for any more questions? Because we're past.
Well, lunch
the-
doesn't open for 15 minutes, so I think we have at least time for one more. This might be like a fun popcorn style question for all of you to answer. Just asking, are there any crops, products, or supply chains that you're particularly interested in innovating where you see opportunities to drive decarbonization and nature positive food and ag at scale? We've heard about a few already.
I'm a big fan of Kernza. So Kernza is a perennial wheatgrass. I think it started in Central Asia, but it's been agronomically sort of evolved to be kind of an alternative to wheat across the Midwest. You can swap out like a percentage of Kernza for regular like flour, and you would never know. Kernza can also be used for animal feed. It can be used in beer making. My husband's a home brewer, so we've done some Kernza experimenting. And the root systems are incredible. So the carbon sequestration, the water benefits are amazing. And it meets like so many principles of regenerative agriculture. So there's work to do to like really scale Kernza supply chains, but that's one I'm excited about.
The question, but I'll go ahead.
Really no new ingredients, but just maybe some changes. So for me, I love to see when I would love to see less farmers and more ranchers. And by that, I mean more ranchers are those that are actually raising livestock on their lands in addition to row crops and so forth. Because again, those are where I've seen the biggest successes to date. And so when I think about feedlots, for anyone who's been to a feedlot, I walk away with a little bit of a hole in my gut thinking this just does not feel right. And yet when I see those ranchers out there that are actually working with the cattle and moving them around the lands, that to me is probably, at least for the supplies that we're looking at, the biggest opportunities.
Nick, the question was just any particular product, crops or systems that excite you in this moment.
Yeah, so there's a whole lot that's very exciting to think about, and I just want to explain the kind of the point on why animal agriculture is so important. Like when you think of overgrazing or you think of factory farming, like that's just terrible for the planet. But I worked at an organic farm, and like the organic farm principle was just like we're not using inputs, we're not using like anything that's harmful for the local environment, and that's fantastic for the soil. Like you're helping all these different microbes, you're helping the environment. Like if a bird comes and like eats your seeds, it's not going to like poison itself later on. The thing when you include animals, and when you include animals rotated and grazing in a way that mimics nature, is that like you just think about what a cow's doing, or like a sheep, a goat, or a bison. They're like going through, they're eating this grass, and they're like letting it digest in their first stomach and then like spit it back out. It's already fermented, and then like they eat that again, and like just what's left over from their waste, from their manure, is the most incredible fertilizer that you can imagine. So you have that fertilizer on the ground, and it's nice when it's on top, but then you have to think about like the dung beetles, and you have to think about like these other insects that allow that to be distributed into the land. So once that, like what the cows, animals, ducks are doing is at an exponential level from what we can accomplish. Like we can do compost, we can do other things, and that's incredible, but animals exponentiate what organic farming can do. So I just wanted to make a quick point on that yeah, animals are very much needed. And like here we had turkeys, we had all sorts of like other animals that we were stewarding, and like people would set fire to grasslands, especially throughout the southeast. There's a native bamboo that people would set fire to that would actually stimulate its growth and attract like bison and other animals to come back. So that's a form of pastoralism and eco-engineering that can be utilized in the future. So I just want to recommend looking into the work of Dr. Lila June. She's done a lot of just research and like presentations on this. She has great lectures on YouTube, and she can explain that a little bit more. So there's a ton of exciting things, and I'd be happy to like go on for 15, 20 minutes about the three sisters, you know, so just approach me about that later. But Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. So back to the soil and manure and animals.
So what excites me is hearing people like you, because I think the solutions out there exist because Mother Nature is in fact pretty close to perfect, and nature-based solutions are at our disposal. What's hard is transforming the systems that we've created, again, from a policy standpoint, from a corporate supply chain standpoint, from a finance standpoint, and those are the mechanisms that we need to start transforming, and that's the hard part. But the solutions exist, as we've brilliantly heard from our panelists today, so please join me in thanking them. Okay, lunchtime.
I know. Yeah.
Oh, wait.
Thanks so much, moderator.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.